Welcome everybody to Fides Wealth Strategies Group. This is Mark Gallo, and we have Chris Rand over here as well. And we're doing these little moments to be able to go across what's coming across our desk these days and talk about it in length with you guys and just give you a little what's happening.
Kind of questions that come up, right? That we notice if we hear it 2 or 3 times from people, or it just comes up in conversations. Maybe it's something that's a topic that's of interest to more than just a couple people we've recently talked to.
Well, let's be honest, right? I mean, with the new administration comes new changes, and people are just trying to understand where do they stand for this year and maybe next year. And so we want to shed a little bit of light on where we stand for this year, right? I think it's probably the safest thing. That's the only thing that we know for certain right now. Unless, of course, they want to change it at the last minute. But, what we're going to go with is what we know for certain right now.
Right.
In some of the things that have really happened. Chris, why don't you talk about the stretch?
Yeah, well, so on the topic of estate planning, I guess, we like to think of estate planning as, it's numerous different things, but when we think about it from an asset standpoint, it's how can we pass on an asset most efficiently at the least amount of transfer cost to the heirs. And a lot of times it's beyond the spouse that people are focusing on. Obviously, not obviously maybe, but most people, everything's going to go to their spouse. And so it's really at the death of the second person, how do we minimize the cost to the heirs? Could be the children, could be other family members. And one way to do that through an IRA, which was used historically, was that the beneficiary would be able to stretch out that IRA over their lifetime. And so they would be able to use their life expectancy just like a spouse does. So a 30-year-old beneficiary could receive an IRA, and then they could take out a very small amount annually over their lifetime, and it gives the benefit of that continued tax deferral. So that was a change that went into place, right?
Yeah,
that is now capped.
Yeah. I was going to say, I used to see him put like a 6-year-old on there, like a 6-year-old, and that 6-year-old would get payments.
That 6-year-old can take out forever, almost literally, right? I mean, the life expectancy of a 6-year-old is a long time. And so that's a very little amount of money that has to come out. But there was a change that went into effect. I believe it was last year. It's definitely in effect now, where a non-spouse beneficiary, has to take it out over 10 years. That's not the end of the world either. You can get a lot of minimizing of the transfer cost by stretching an IRA out over 10 years, or even a few years shorter than that if you choose to. But the ability to stretch over life expectancy now for non-spouse beneficiaries is no longer.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the tax deferral instrument, the IRA, is a great instrument, especially when it's being used in a tax deferral method. So, obviously the IRS just wanted to get some more tax revenue and, kind of ramp that up a little bit.
Can you blame them though, Mark? I mean, we constantly, when someone turns 70 and a half or now 72 is the new requirement or distribution age that you have to start taking money out of your retirement accounts, and you have to take out that minimal amount of money. So another type of a life expectancy distributions. The vast majority of the time, people would say, why do I have to take it out? I don't need it. I don't want it. And my response to them is, look, the IRS gave you a phenomenal tax benefit over all these years. You got the benefit of having the account defer, not pay income tax, compound on itself, but at some point they want to see some revenue on that. And so that's one way to start that. And this is a secondary way is if you had it all the way to when you passed away, and it's not going to your spouse. They do not want to see this stretched out. I imagine that's probably why the rule is written over the next 30 to 40 to 50 years. And so, but 10 years is still a pretty good deal.
Yeah, because if we were employing the whole give it to a 6-year-old, just imagine that would go over their life expectancy as well.
Yeah,
so
long period of time.
Yeah, imagine that, a loophole.
And that's not to say you have to stretch it over 10 years. You could take it over 3. You could take it all in 1 year. The nice thing is the beneficiary has the ability to make the choice on how they want to do that.
Yeah, which is it's a fantastic thing to utilize. Some things obviously from a tax planning strategy. When you start talking about estate planning. One of the things that a lot of our clients like to look at is how can I transfer these assets to my next of kin, really, the most efficiently. One of the things to always think about is what is your current tax bracket, and then who do you want to distribute these assets to? If you're in a lot lower tax bracket than that individual, say you're just living on Social Security and you've got some assets set aside, but nothing crazy, then sometimes those ideas of taking those assets in the pre-tax position, paying taxes at your rate, than to give them to an heir at a higher tax bracket, sometimes a little bit more efficient ways to approach it, right?
Yeah, let's do a quick example. Mom's 80 years old and she's in that 10% income tax bracket or 15% income tax bracket, and her beneficiary is an executive at XYZ company earning $400,000 a year, and maybe it's a young executive, so the presumption is that the inheritance would be during the time they're still working. Mom could pay it at her 10 or 15% income tax rate rather than the executive receiving it and having to take that out over 10 years at a potentially much higher tax rate. That's what you're referring to, I believe, right?
I mean, if you think about it from a sense, I mean, that's advanced level planning, right? It's just not just set it and forget it kind of planning. You need to be active and understand where things are going to go and redistribute. So it's important to look at those type of things.
I'll take it one step further, Mark, and say maybe even a better strategy if it's an IRA, rather than taking the money out if you don't need it, would be to do it as a Roth conversion, because you're converting it now to a tax-free, tax-deferred to be tax-free vehicle. That 80-year-old mom could do that, and it's all now growing tax-free until they pass away, and then it's still the same, stretch requirements over 10 years, but it's tax-free when it comes out then to the end beneficiary.
Yeah, and those are excellent ideas, and I can tell you that the Roth conversion was a really great thing to bring into as a planning technique over the years. It's definitely helped things out a lot. One of the things that I have learned over time is that special needs beneficiaries, if they are into the system as a special needs individual, that stretch can still be in existence. I mean, and one of the things is, again, it has to be planned out properly through a special needs trust in order to make those type of things happen. But those still work in those scenarios. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, finish your thought, and then I'll go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just going to go over to the next thing, which is the exemption. The big debt, let's call it death tax exemption, right?
Yeah, and that's what I would say. That's really where the questions have been coming up that I've been hearing from clients is, oh boy, we got a new presidential administration, and we're going to see a major change to the estate tax. Currently right now it's over 11 million, around that much. That means that each person could exempt that amount of money. So very, very few people actually pay an estate tax under the current law. But that exemption is going to end in a few years, and then it's going to revert back to the prior law. And so there's really two things I think that you want to be thinking about here is, one, could the current administration and the current Congress, really at the end of the day, it's really the current Congress, get through a law passed in the next 2 years or the next 4 years to change the exemption amount? I don't know. Hard to say, right? A very, very thin Congress. Personally, I think that's less likely of a scenario than it is a likely scenario. But that is something that the current administration did talk about in the campaign as having an interest there. Yeah, Mark brought up a really good point when we were talking about this. He thinks the more likely scenario is that nothing happens. And then we revert back to the previous law, which will, if there's no action in Congress, I believe it's 2025, might be that year or close, somewhere around that year. So it's a few years out still, but we would go ahead and revert back to the previous rules, which would considerably reduce the exemption amount for estate tax purposes. Considerably,
which that goes into a lot of other areas. If you're doing planning, you have to kind of plan on when we do planning, we have to plan based on the current laws, the way they're written, right? So, I mean, as long as you're planning on passing away before 2025 and you've got a $15 million estate, well, okay, you have a little bit of estate tax. If you die in 2026, there's a huge estate tax problem. It brings me back to the days back in 2010, if you recall, Chris, where I think there was an unlimited exemption.
Yeah, 1 year with an unlimited exemption, because the estate tax went away for 1 year, and boy, that was the year to pass away. The interesting thing is that we don't have a whole heck of a lot of control over that, right. And hopefully you don't have any control over that, but, you just don't. No one else has control over that. No one else has control over that. You just don't know, right? And that's that's the really, really hard thing with estate planning and planning for estate taxes is you don't know when you're going to pass away. You don't know what the laws are going to be. Just in the 25 years I've been doing this, the exemption amount has changed. I don't know how many times, a lot, and the rules keep changing. Right now, the step up in basis which is, I think, a huge benefit from a transfer tax standpoint. The fact that if you own an asset like real estate, as an example, or a stock that you might have bought it for $1 and it's worth $10 now, if you were to sell it, you owe capital gains tax on the difference between the dollar cost basis and the $10 market value. But if you were to pass away with that asset, your beneficiary inherits it at the current market value, which is $10. So their new cost basis is the current market value. So there's no capital gains tax owed or no transfer tax. And that's something that could be looked at as well. That step up in basis could be something potentially that goes away or changes. We could see changes to capital gains tax rates. They're 15 or 20, depending on your income tax bracket today. They were 28% when I believe it was when I started in the business, or right around that time. Went from 28 to 20 to 15, now to 15, 20, plus this 3.8% net investment income tax. And so there's a lot of different tax rates and different taxes that may change. It makes it really hard to do planning.
Think about the perfect storm, Chris. I mean, you have...
What would that be?
A state tax exemption basically goes back down to the million that it's always seems to revert back to, and you don't get a step up in basis. Man, it's a perfect storm. Yeah,
that would not be good from an estate planning standpoint. I don't think that would happen as it's currently written, but you just don't know, right? I mean, that's the big question, is we just don't know, where things are going to go. And so that's why it's important, to your point, is that we plan based on what we know today.
Yep.
And then we pay attention to what's going on in Congress, talk with your advisors, talk with your estate planning attorney, talk with your CPA or tax professional about what possible changes could be and what they could possibly mean for you, so that you're educated on the subject, so that if it happens, you've already thought it through and you're comfortable with making a proactive decision on how to change your planning.
Absolutely. Don't make any permanent plans yet. Well, I think this is a pretty good wrap up on estate planning. What do you think, Chris?
I think we're good.
As always, if you have any further questions you want to ask myself or Chris, feel free to give us a call at 619-546-6012. As always, appreciate everybody and their continued following, and we'll talk to you again soon.